Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Jan Rice. I'm a Master Gardener with Prince William County. First off, I would like to thank the Henrico County Master Gardeners. They put on a presentation on houseplants called Baby It's Cold Outside, and they allowed me to use some of the slides in helping preparation for this presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is really about houseplants and how to care for them. I'll start out by telling you different ways that you can care for plants, and then we'll look at different varieties. There's so many different varieties. I need to get, there we go, sorry. So many different varieties, we won't cover them all today. Like people, plants respond to extra attention. If you're not careful, your houseplants will begin to look like this. So before you get started, there's some things to think about. Which houseplant is best? How much room will it need when it's fully grown? You see those lovely little 2-inch pots in the store, or maybe they're 8 or 10-inch pots, but how big will they grow in time? What light conditions do the plants need? What kind of light do you have in your living situation? What are the water and soil requirements? Are you going to be willing to water them if it's a plant that requires a lot of water? And if you have pets or children, is it pet or child friendly? And that's really important if you don't have a way to keep them away from your pets, because it can be a safety issue. And does it require a lot of care? And are you willing to care for it? It's easier to pick a plant that fits your situation than to change the conditions in your home to fit that plant. Purchasing indoor plants. When you go to a store or a nursery, you're going to want to check the health of the plant leaves, the stems, and the roots. And that doesn't mean you necessarily have to pull them out of the pot, but you can look and see if, especially if there's some kind of odor coming out of it, that might indicate that it's been overwatered and has rotting roots. Check underneath the leaves and at stem junctions for pests. Even very reliable nurseries can get an infestation of pests. You want to avoid plants that have yellow leaves, brown leaf margins, or wilting. And always use a reliable retailer, because that retailer probably is using a reliable source for their plants. Bringing your indoor plants home. If it's winter, now today it's going to be 50, it's not that important, but if it's in the 30s, you're going to want to wrap that plant up when you carry it to the car, and put it inside your vehicle, not in the trunk where it will be very cold. Many indoor plants have a threshold of about 50 degrees. If it's colder than that, they may suffer damage. If it's the summer, it's obvious, don't leave it in a hot car in the summer. When you bring it home, acclimatize it slowly. You're going to hear me say that over and over in the presentation. Plants, when they move from different situations, struggle sometimes. So they develop different leaves depending on the level of light. If the plant is in a box store and it's brightly lit, they may have developed leaves that respond to that light level. You bring them to a low level in your home, a lower level, and it may struggle. So you may need to put some artificial lights on it for a while to give it a chance to acclimatize. New plants should be quarantined away from other plants. Anyone who's had house plants has had an experience where they brought one in and infested every other plant in the place. Just for sanitation reasons, wash your hands after handling new plants. And in general, indoor plants like temperature ranges in the 65 to 75 degree range in the daytime and 50 to 60 degrees at night. Different plants have different requirements, so you will want to check each individual plant to be sure. Indoor plants need light. Now, light can vary in quality, intensity, and in the duration. The quality is denoted by the wavelengths. Different wavelengths have different effect on plants. The blue-violet range promotes foliage growth. Yellow and green has no effect on it at all. and the red and far red spectrum encourages flowering. So if you're using artificial lights, you may want to check and see what kind of wavelength they have. Intensity can be low, medium, or high. And as I said before, you don't want to take a plant from a low intensity light source and put it in a high one. It can stress the plant or damage it permanently. Your duration, many houseplants come from the tropical regions. So the duration would be about 12 hours a day in their normal situation. So you want to give them that kind of light in your home. They need bright, indirect light, most of them, a sunny window or fluorescent lamps. But sunny window, that one you have to be very careful of because a sunny south-facing window is not the same as a sunny east-facing window. And I love this quote. I thought I was pretty cool until I realized plants can eat sunlight and poop air. So different light, amounts of light have different effects on plants. So if you don't have enough light, you'll have no growth, yellowing leaves, dropping leaves, loss of variegation in the plant leaves, and the soil may stay too wet. Perfect light gives you new growth with dark green leaves, or depending on the color of the leaves, few leaves dropping, strong variegation, and you'll need to water it regularly. Not enough light gives you too much light gives you different growth on the leaves. They may look white or pale. The leaves may drop. You may see scorched leaves, as in they turn brown or get brown spots on them. And the soil dries out much too quickly, so they'll wilt very quickly. Repotting. Not everyone does this. I tend to repot new plants when I get them because that gives me a chance to check their roots. Not even necessarily in a larger pot, but just to check out the condition of the plant. You don't have to do that. But when you see, if you've had the plant for a year or two and you see roots coming out of the drain hole, then that's an indication that it has outgrown its home. The timeline will vary based on the plant. When you go to repot, use clean pots. It wants to be just a couple of inches larger than your current pot. You don't want to take a 6-inch pot and put it into an 18-inch pot. It will not do well. You want it just large enough for the root ball and some additional root growth. And when you repot, you want to leave room above the soil line so that when you water, the water will have a chance to soak downwards and doesn't roll right off onto the floor. Pot selection. All pots need a drain hole. Unglazed clay pots will absorb and lose moisture through their walls, so they're ideal for things like cactus and things that don't mind having dry soil. Ceramic pots that are glazed on the outside, if they have no hole, then just put a second container inside with something in the bottom. The top left picture you see is one of mine, and I used to use Yankee candles all the time, and that's a top from a Yankee candle. I used to save them, and I'd stick them in the bottom of the pot, put another pot on top, and then that allows, if the water gets down, it doesn't sit in and get wet roots. Plastic and fiberglass can be easily sterilized, which is important. It doesn't collect the salts the way the clay pots do or evaporate too much water. Metal pots, copper, brass, galvanized, use an interior pot. The one on the bottom is an old copper pot that belonged to my mother-in-law, and I love it and I keep it even though it's ugly, but I would never plant anything directly into it. Potting mix. So what potting mix do you use? There's a wide variety out there. I'm not going to recommend a specific variety, but it's not soil. It's a mix of peat moss and pine bark. And different varieties can hold too little or too much water or even incorporate too much air. Specialty mixes are available for cactus, African violets, and orchids. What I recommend is trying it. I get giant bags because I have so many plants, but get a small bag of it and test it on a plant and see how it does. And if you like it and it works well, then that one's a good choice for you. You can make your own. There's a recipe in the Virginia Tech publication, Indoor Plant Culture. It's available at ext.vt.edu. At the end of this presentation, I'll tell you how we can send you information if you don't catch this today. Almost everything that I got for this presentation came from this particular publication, so it's a very good read. Now, how do you repot? The best way is to, and this is a very small one, and I'll talk in a minute about larger ones. So you hold your hand over the potting medium, keeping the plant stem between your fingers, turn it upside down, and tap the pot lip on the edge of the work surface. Tease it out gently, and then if there are large encircling roots around the root ball, trim those away so that it's not root bound anymore. If it has accumulated salts on the top, if you fertilized it too much, it will, or it can just come from watering, you want to scrape the salts off the top. I'll talk about watering in a minute, and that will explain more about it. If you have a very large plant, so I have an enormous Christmas cactus, I can't turn it upside down. I can't tap it on anything. I don't even repot it anymore. I just very gently work around it, get a little of the soil out on the edges, and then add a little bit of extra potting medium to it to keep it refreshed. But it's just way too big, and some plants are like that. So you add a little bit of potting mix in the bottom and add water so it settles, because you don't want it to compact after you put the plant in place. You don't want you don't want gravel or sand in the bottom. I use a coffee filter because the soil will wash out the holes in the pot, but these coffee filters, it's just a temporary thing and it will rot. By the time I go to repot that you won't even know I ever put it in there. You can keep the root ball an inch or two below the pot rim for watering purposes. You want to center the plant in the center of your pot, and then very gently fill in all the sides just to the level of the top of the root ball. You can actually suffocate a plant if you plant it too deeply. This is the same as planting plants outside. If you put it too deeply in the pot and then you cover the top of the root ball with too much soil, that can suffocate the plant. Care and grooming. You want to be sure, checking periodically, removing dying flowers, leaves, or branches. Trim any brown, dry edges with sharp scissors. You can pinch stem tips of some plants, and here again, you want to pay attention to how a plant likes to be cared for individually versus this is just general. And if you pinch it above a node, that will stimulate more growth. It also keeps a plant compact. Turn it frequently to prevent it leaning towards the light. And you can wash it with warm water and mild soap. Now that's pure soap and not detergent. And you certainly don't want any antibiotic soaps. This can damage the leaves, the buds. If you're going to wash the leaves with soap, cover the soil so you don't soak it in soapy water. It's very easy to do. Just put a little plastic around it, and then you can wash off the leaves. You can also remove some flower buds for larger blooms or to help a young plant grow stronger. If it's a very, very new plant, you don't really want it growing flowers until its roots are strong enough to support them. Watering. Overwatering is the #1 killer of houseplants. I'm going to repeat that. Overwatering is the #1 killer of houseplants. You want to wait until the top 2 inches is dry or the container feels light. I have these wooden craft sticks. I have a bag of them, and I use them, and I stick them inside the soil, because when I stick my finger in and I pull it out, I seem to spread soil everywhere. This just goes in easily. When it slips down and I pull it out and it's not covered in dark soil, I know it's time to water. The best way to do it is place it in a sink or tub and then water until it drains out the bottom. Wait to put it back in its original place until it's well drained. This helps remove excess salts in the water and in fertilizers. The best thing to use is room temperature rainwater or well water because it won't injure sensitive plants. That being said, I don't live in a place with well water anymore. I used to, but if you have just city or county tap water, you can leave it sit overnight for chlorine and fluoride to dissipate. Now, what I do is I clean with vinegar. So I have these big gallon jugs. Once they're clean, I rinse them out. I fill them with water and just leave them with the tops off. And I have at least a dozen of them, and I rotate them so that the water has had time to, the chemicals have evaporated. If you have water softener treated water, that can burn some plants' roots. So you need to watch for that. And if that's so, then you may need to get water from another source. A rain barrel, if you have a rain barrel outside, you can use that. Humidity. Keep your plants away from air vents. In our homes, we have these vents that blow hot, dry air, and it dries out the air around the plants. You can run a humidifier. You can just get a cheap one from the local big box store or online. Or you can take a tray with pebbles. These are really more rocks than pebbles. Cover it with water. Misting is good for plants, but it does not increase humidity. All the misting does is put additional moisture onto those leaves. Fertilizer. Because plants are in an environment where they don't have an opportunity, they'll use up the nutrients in that potting mix fairly quickly within maybe 4 to 6 months. So you are going to have to use some fertilizer with some plants. And here again, you need to look at the individual needs of that plant. There are soluble ones or slow release fertilizers. You always want to follow the manufacturer's instructions so you don't put in too much, but I'm also going to recommend that you use less than they recommend. Fertilize based on growth rate. The more leaves you have, the more fertilizer you're probably going to need. But that doesn't mean beyond the manufacturer's instructions. So if it's slow growing plant, reduce that fertilizer by half. Slow release fertilizers like small beads, you can spread them. They're so easy to use. You spread them evenly on the soil surface. Again, if it says use a tablespoon of them, I'd use half that to start with and see. If it needs a little bit more, you can always add it. It's much harder to take it away. The potting mix may already contain slow release fertilizer, so read the bag carefully. If it says it has enough fertilizer for 6 months, believe it and don't fertilize for 6 months. Potting mixes contain very little of trace chemicals, for want of a better word, but iron, manganese, zinc, copper. So use a fertilizer with those trace elements to help your plant. Plants want to grow. They're on your side as long as you're reasonably sensible. So as long as you're reasonably careful with your plants, most of them are pretty hardy. Another comment on fertilizers. Their concentration of fertilizer salts can be toxic to roots. So irrigation, as I mentioned, and watering helps rinse those salts away and keep it from building up. Use less than the recommended rate. You can add a small amount of compost to the top of your plants if you want to give it a little boost rather than fertilizer. But never fertilize a dry root ball. Water it for a few hours before you plan to add the fertilizer. And in general, they don't need fertilizer in the winter months. You want to fertilize when new growth starts in March, or even when you start putting them out for the summer. Taking plants outside. Don't be in a hurry. Nighttime temperatures above 55 degrees in general is what is recommended. But when I get to the part about talking about individual plants, there are some plants that can't tolerate below 60 degrees. So you want to know your plants and when it's safe to take them out. Check each plant to see what its minimum temperature is. When you take it out, find a compatible outdoor light. So if this plant has been indoors in a low light situation, don't sit it out in full sun. The leaves will get sunburned. They'll look crispy, crunchy. Move them from indoor light. Even a plant that needs full sun, move it slowly. Again, that word acclimatize. Acclimatize, acclimatize, acclimatize. can't take a plant from one setting to another that's vastly different without it suffering. It may survive, but it won't look very good. And also avoid very windy spots because you don't have wind in your house. They're not used to it. At the end of the summer, bringing them back inside, you want to be sure you bring only your plant and not any hitchhikers. Again, acclimatize to your indoor conditions. If you have a porch, you can move it from your yard to a porch, leave it there for a while, and move it indoors. And you want to do this well before first sign of frost. If you get the frost warning on your phone, it's a little late to be trying to bring your plants inside. It can give them shock. Check for signs of disease and insects. Isolate plants that you find pests on until you have it under control. Prune any diseased, broken, or dead branches from the plant. And remove debris from the soil surface. That's where so many little pests love to hide. Make sure that the container drains freely. Sometimes, especially if you've set it out on the soil, it's become clogged, and that won't allow water to drain out. And you can tell this just by watering and then holding it up. If the water drains out, it's all good. Wash the outside of the pot because there can be insect eggs, salts, and soil from outside, and you don't want to bring that in. You can also soak a pot for about 15 to 20 minutes to drown soil-dwelling pests, but I don't mean you cover the whole plant. Just put the pot in a bucket that's enough so that it comes up, well up the sides, and so that water will soak into the soil. And some of the little charmers that might come with your plant indoors are mealy bugs and thrips. These are magnifications. They do not look like this, but this is what they look like if you looked at them under a magnifying glass. Mealy bugs can infest all plant parts, including the roots. They have a waxy coating on their body, which prevents insecticides from working. Their egg masses can resist insecticides. Thrips are tiny and fast. They hide in flowers and leaf buds, and they're very hard to see. One way you can do this, they keep the flowers and leaf buds, cut them off. They'll grow new ones when they go inside. They cause feeding damage, and viruses can go from one plant to another. They can fly. Spider mites. They are so tiny, you really can't see them. I love that they're ovalish and yellow, but you're not going to see them except under a microscope. They feed under the leaves, sucking the sap. It causes stippling and bronzing, and you'll see spider webs around the edges of the leaves and underneath. And the population can increase rapidly, and they can spread from plant to plant before you can blink. Fungus gnats are the bane of my existence. They live in the soil. They eat organic matter. They do very little damage to the plants themselves unless you allow them to build up. And the best way is to allow the soil to dry out between waterings. Refer back to the slide on watering. You can use a BT drench to control the larvae, and they're often confused with fruit flies. Propagation. Now, you could do a whole hour class on propagation, probably several hour classes on propagation. All I'm going to do is mention a few different ways. I have another slide on some more specifics after this, but leaf cuttings, stem cuttings, layering, and layering is down here is a slide where you wrap up a part of the stem and then cover it in plastic. Divisions, you can take chunks of them. This one is a good example where you just break apart the crown and then repot each section. You can do it from runners, especially spider plants work well like that. To do this, you just need a sterile medium, some plastic and stakes, and even those things are not necessary. The sterile medium is, but the plastic and stakes not necessarily. Your tools, just some sharp scissors or some sharp pruners. When you are propagating, you're going to need indirect bright light and no fertilizer. I know that's counterintuitive. So this is an example of a Christmas cactus being propagated. All you have to do is take your cuttings, dip it in water and rooting hormone, plant the cuttings in a well-drained potting medium, put it in bright light with slightly warmer temperatures because that really does encourage growth. Keep the potting media moist, but not wet. That means don't pour water on it. You're probably just going to take a little bit of water and drip it over it to keep it damp. And that's where the plastic can come in. You can cover it like a little greenhouse. After about 2 weeks, you can use a spoon to gently lift the cutting and check to see if the roots have grown. Once roots have formed, then you can put them into a pot and you're ready to go. And this is not a nice thing to talk about, but I have to, because for many plants, indoor house plants, they come from tropical regions, they're highly toxic. I found one good site. There are many others, but the North Carolina Extension Garden Plant Toolbox. And again, at the end of this presentation, I'll tell you how we can send you this information so you don't have to copy it down. You can just search for toxic, or there's a list of non-toxic to dogs, non-toxic to cats. There's also non-toxic to horses if you're interested in that, but you don't usually have horses inside. Plants have varying degrees of toxicity. Some parts of the plant may be perfectly safe and others may be toxic. And this applies not just to houseplants, it's also all the plants in your yard. And remember that non-toxic does not mean that anyone should eat that plant. It just means the reaction that you get may not be a fatal one. In case of accidental exposure or ingestion, contact poison control, and that's a national number. So now we get into individual plants. I started with African violet. These were found in East Africa in 1892. Of course, they'd existed much longer than that. It's where they get their name. They grow best under grow lights, but I don't grow mine under grow lights, so you can do it. It depends on the light you have. So bright eastern light is best. You want to protect them from southern or western light. And I don't have any bright eastern light in my house, and that's true for many others as well, probably, but I grow them and they grow quite well. I keep them in my southwest facing windows, but protected from the light. I keep them underneath a shelf that gives them filtered light. Keep water off the crown and leaves. Check soil before watering. It wants a potting mix with a lot of organic matter in it. And you can propagate this very easily from leaf cuttings or division. They are subject to mealy bugs, powdery mildew, stem, and crown rot. This isn't one I would take outside. You don't need to, and then that eliminates some of the problems. The aloe vera plant, which originated in Africa, is popular because it's so easy to care for. It's also known because the sap of it can soothe burns. I don't know if there's scientific evidence for that, but certainly people believe it. This does well with low water, medium or high light, and average humidity. It has very few problems, but don't overwater or fertilizer. And anthurium, this likes medium to high light, moist soil, and low to medium humidity. So like this thrives well in my house because I have very low humidity. It has no serious pests, but it is toxic. We think of begonias outside, but you can actually bring your begonias inside and keep them through the winter. Bright indirect light, fluorescent lights work well with them. They do like high humidity. Allow it to dry out a bit between waterings. You can propagate it by a division of its rhizomatous roots. Bacterial leaf spot, powdery mildew, botrytis, and stem rot are some of its problems. It needs good air circulation, and its pests are mealy bugs and thrips. I would say that these plants, because they're so cheap and easy to get, that if you're really struggling with mealy bugs and things like that, get a new plant. Ferns, there are too many of them to even mention. Many of them don't make good house plants, but here's a couple that do. They like bright indirect light. They like temperatures of 60 to 70 degrees. They like it on the cooler side. They like high humidity, which is why I don't have one in my house. You need to keep the soil moist at all times, not wet, but moist. And in the winter, you can reduce their watering somewhat. They are very good at removing indoor air pollutants. These two, like the Boston fern, which is the one on the right, that has a draping aspect, so it goes very well in hanging baskets. This Kimberly Queen is upright in form, so it looks good in urns, looks good in your patio in the summer, but you can keep it through the winter. Cactus, again, we could do a whole presentation on cactus. I just picked this one because it was pretty. They grow very slowly. They're very low maintenance. They're like full to partial sun when they're outside. Be sure to bring these inside before the first frost because it can be damaging. You pot them with cactus potting mix. Other potting mixes hold too much water for them. It's better to use a clay pot with several drainage holes to make sure that the roots don't get wet and allow the soil to dry well between waterings. This Chinese evergreen is from tropical Asia and Africa. It likes low light, so if you have an apartment, say, where you don't get a lot of light, this would be a good choice. It tolerates low humidity, and you can propagate it easily by division. It's also one that's good to keep the air clean. The Croton from the Malaccan Islands, Malaysia and the Pacific Islands. It likes high light, high humidity. Now I'm going to say this is my plant and I don't have high humidity. So yeah, you can manage with less, but I do keep it away from any drafts and airflow. It likes regular fertilization and it likes to be pot bound. So you shouldn't repot this too much. You should not let it dry out. Leaves will turn brown and dry if it's too hot or too dry. And if lower leaves fall, the air is too dry. It's subject to thrips, scale, mealy bugs, and spider mites. I don't take this outside in the summer because I really don't want to deal with those things. The Dieffenbachia, this is also known as dumb cane. This is very highly toxic. This is from Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and Puerto Rico. It likes medium light, so it will tolerate fairly low light conditions. If you have a room that doesn't have bright southern facing windows, then that'd be a good choice for it. It will tolerate low humidity. Too much fertilizer causes leaf burn. So this is one I would fertilize very, very sparingly. You can use air layering or cuttings on this one. It's very easy to propagate. It suffers from mites, aphids, and scale and other fungal diseases. And as I said, highly toxic. The Dracina, a favorite of mine, although I'm not particularly successful at growing it. You need to allow it to dry between waterings. It likes bright, indirect sun, and the leaves can go brown in low humidity. These do very well outside in Virginia summers. And then when I bring it inside, that's when it gets a little dry, and it's sensitive to fluoride. And that's what I feel its biggest problem is. If you bring it inside, you really have to let that water, let the fluoride evaporate for a long time for this one. This has low toxicity. It's mites, thrips, and leaf spot. The Dracina, it's another version of this. This one's often called the corn plant. Another one allowed to dry between watering. It also likes bright filtered light. Leaves can turn brown in low humidity. It's also sensitive to fluoride. It's in the same family as the last Dracina. Its temperature, it likes on the warm side, 70 to 80 degrees. So this would be one you don't want to take outside before it gets really warm. It has low toxicity, mites, thrips, and leaf spot. The Ficus or weeping fig, it's from India, Southeast Asia. And it can be a really big tree. I once had one of these that I used to take back and forth from my house to the library where I worked, where I had a 2-story atrium. And then it got so big, I couldn't even find anybody who was willing to cart it for me. So it had to go. But this is another one that grows very, very big. It likes high humidity. Don't overwater it. Bright to medium light, but not southern exposure. So if you've only got southern exposure, you can bring it back in so it doesn't get the direct light. It can still have that light, but just you don't want to sit it directly in a window. It is not like drafts. It has scale, mealy bugs, and spider mites as its problems. A hibiscus, I threw this one in. It's not the most common of houseplants, but again, it's a tree, grows into a tree. But many people like to have them on their patios in the summer. They're very charming plants. And it likes moist, well-drained soil. Don't let it dry out. And you can prune it to maintain shape. It flowers on new growth, though. So once you prune it, it's not going to flower for a while. It's very easy to propagate from stem cuttings. I'm going to say to all my master gardener friends, I know this is not pruned very well, but I've had this one for more than 10 years, and it can grow to 5 or 6 feet tall. The Hoya, it's also called the porcelain flower or the wax plant. It likes bright, indirect light, high organic matter, good drainage, high humidity. Again, let the soil dry before watering. You'll hear that so many times today. It has fairly rapid growth, and it's medium care. It's non-toxic to pets, which makes it a popular one. The jade plant, pretty much the only way you're going to kill this plant is by overwatering it. It likes bright to medium light. This is in a south-facing window. You can do from stem or leaf cuttings. When I have one of them fall off, I just stick them in the soil, and sometimes it roots and sometimes it doesn't. It tolerates low humidity, which is why it likes my house. It has scale and mealy bugs as its problems, fertilized very sparingly, and it also likes to be root bound. The peace lily is probably one of the most popular plants to have in a house. They're very attractive, have lovely white flowers. Comes from Central America, Indonesia, and the Philippines. It likes low to medium light, so if you have a room with poor light, it's a good one to have. Minimal fertilizer. It actually requires very minimal care. It does like warmish temperatures, 68 to 85, so don't take it outside too soon. It's great for cleaning the air, so it works well in an office. Very easy to divide, just divide the roots. High humidity for best flower production. It doesn't mind, it'll tolerate lower humidity, but you won't get very nice flowers. Clean the leaves to control pests. This is a dust collector, and it doesn't do well cleaning the air when it's all covered in dust. So you do have to either wash them or wipe them down with a cloth. The little peperomia is so cute. It's intolerant of wet soil or very dry soil or drafts. It likes bright, indirect light. Again, the dry soil, but not too dry. Medium to low humidity. So if you have low humidity, this one would work for you. It thrives on being pot bound. If you don't like to repot your plants often, good choice. This is not toxic to pets, and it has no serious disease pest problems. The philodendron is very often confused with the next plant on my list, the pothos, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if you look at this, you'll notice it has heart-shaped leaves and it has thin stems. It's from Mexico. It likes low to medium light, average temperature, medium humidity, moist soil. This one is toxic, I'm sorry to say, because it's so easy to grow. It grows from stem cuttings. Just cut one off, stick it in water, and you're good to go. It has very few problems. But it's very often confused with pothos, if I'm saying it correctly, which is the devil's ivy. It's from Southeast Asia. It's low to medium light, which is why it thrives so well in my stairwell. These are mine. But it is toxic. It grows from stem cuttings with absolutely no problem. Cut it off, stick it in water, it'll root within weeks, and you can repot it. It is undemanding. It has very few problems, and you can let it dry out quite a bit. These, because they're in my upper stairwell, they tend to get ignored a lot, and I have to go, oops, I haven't watered them in a while. Prayer plants from Brazil and tropical Americas. They need low light and high humidity. They need to be kept moist, but if they're too wet, the roots will rot. These can be finicky. They have a minimum temperature of 55 degrees, and they don't like to be in a draft. And spider mites can be a problem. Because they have big leaves, it's fairly easy to check these and see if they have any pests on them. The Siviera snake plant, it's also called mother-in-law's tongue, although I don't like that name as I'm a mother-in-law. They're from Indonesia, India, and tropical Africa. Do not overwater them. These are the easiest plants in the world to minimal care, and they will live for years and years and years. You can divide them at the roots, or you can just cut off a leaf, stick it in that potting medium, and let it go. These are very toxic, though. I will say that my college roommate has the same plant that we had in our college dorm room, and that was over 50 years ago. So they're very hard to kill. Spider plants, they're from coastal South Africa. They like medium indirect light. This also sits well in my stairwell. They like moist soil, moderate water, medium humidity, low fertilizer. You really don't have to fertilize these at all, but they're very sensitive to chlorine and fluoride. They are non-toxic, and the plantlets form in the short days and long nights. And I considered using a better example than mine because mine does have the chlorine and fluoride. I really struggle with getting enough of the fluoride out of the water in order it not to burn the tips of these leaves. But I decided to use this so you could see this is a healthy plant. It grows new leaves, it grows new babies. I just gave away several, but it does have that root tip burn. I'm sorry, not root tip, leaf tip burn. The split leaf philodendron is not a philodendron at all. It's native to the tropics of North and South America. It's a climbing vine. It does have toxic leaves and stems. It likes temperatures of 60 to 85 degrees. So don't put this outside if the nights are going to be 55. It likes indirect light, high humidity, and water when the top of the soil becomes dry. The rattlesnake calathea, it likes bright light, high humidity, moist soil, constant room temperature. It has no serious disease or pest problems, but it is intolerant of low humidity, wet soil, dry soil, cold drafts, direct sun, or low light. I just love it because its leaves are so pretty. And we'll end with the ZZ plant. It's native of South Africa. It is slow growing, indirect light or artificial light. You water when dry, when the rhizomes, because it has rhizomes that hold water, you can barely kill this plant. You fertilize it. The professionals say 2 times a year, half strength. I would probably say you could get away with once a year or not at all. This one is just incredibly tough. You can propagate it through leaf cuttings, but it is toxic. And the Grumpy Gardener wrote this to the tune of ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man, and I'll let you read it yourself. It is considered one of the toughest house plants. It can survive being ignored in an office. It can survive just about anything you can throw at it. And these are the resources. I've created a bibliography that if you want to send a request, so you don't have to copy this or copy the screen, do a screenshot, you can send it to mastergardener@pwcgov.org. If you're going to do research on plants, and I highly recommend before you buy that plant, do some research. Search the plant name space.edu. That will give you the scientific research on the plant and not just what somebody puts on Pinterest. The publication I used for preparing this is Indoor Plant Culture, which is from Virginia Tech, and you can find that at Virginia Tech, but as I said, we can send it to you if you want to send an email to mastergardener@pwcgov.org. Again, I want to thank the Henrico County Cooperative Extension for sharing their presentation with me. Baby, it's cold outside, so I could use a couple of their slides. The North Carolina State Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox is an excellent resource. Also, there's the University of Illinois has lists of plants toxic to animals. And so does Cornell, but I didn't add it to this list because very honestly, when I went looking for it, I had a hard time finding it. So I didn't list it, but if you want to use that, just go to Cornell Extension and then start searching. It's buried deep. Other videos are available that we have done. They're available on our YouTube channel. And in December, I did a program on holiday plants. And so I did not include the typical plants you see at holidays, kalanchoes, Thanksgiving and Christmas cactuses, but those are available if you want to watch on the other presentation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Any questions, indoor plants, outdoor plants, Don't forget to drink water and get some sunlight because you're basically a houseplant with more complicated emotions. Life is short. Buy plants. Thank you everyone for coming. And now if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
You have a recommendation for a great app for plant identification, care, and propagation?
You know, I really don't, for identification, I use iNaturalist. It tends to be more outdoor plants, but I think you could do it for indoor ones as well. I probably should have looked that up before I started, but I tell you what, if you send your questions to Master Gardener and we will look that up. I'm sure they exist. Does anybody else who's listening know of one?
I've not seen anything on plant care.
Okay.
There are several plant ID apps, but I've not seen one that's any good on plant care yet.
If you look up the name of a plant.edu, you will find, and I really like that North NC State one because I was looking up plant after plant and I didn't come across any that I was trying to find. And obviously I had to pare this down because I had to make it, under an hour. But that was a pretty comprehensive list, I will say. But they're not alone. University of Florida has some good lists. Cornell is great. The University of Illinois had some. I'm trying to think of the other places I went. I think Ohio State had a good list. So any of those places, you can usually find the plant and details about it.
There's a succulent question.
Mm-hmm.
I've built succulent gardens. Any recommendations for caring for them?
I'm not your best on succulents, but the thing that I would say, no matter what, is don't overwater them. Most succulents are very hardy, but their root systems, it seems to me, are their weakness. So if they get waterlogged, they can go in a flash. So you just want to make sure that when you water them, it drains well. It wants to soak in well so they absorb some water and then let that puppy drain and don't let it sit in a saucer of water. I can't recommend enough putting something underneath your plant that raises it up off the saucer, whether it's pebbles. That really helps because then the water it flows through, and if you don't get a chance to tip out all the water, it doesn't absorb right back up and rot the roots. And that's true for any plant that's in a pot, whether it's a big pot outside, whether it's one inside, it doesn't matter. Sitting in water will rot roots.
I hardly ever water my succulent gardens.
Yeah, succulents, the only time I've had succulents die is when I was still teaching high school, and it was because kids watered them every day.
Yeah.
But most succulents are like aloe. They're very difficult to kill. Neglect is not going to hurt them. It's over care that's going to hurt them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get pests, and you do have to. My Kalanchoes, they all bit the dust about 2 years ago when I had a really bad infestation, and it drove me crazy trying to get them cleaned out, and then they got powdery mildew. And the problem is once they're weakened, especially houseplant, there's not a lot of resources for them. They're isolated. They are in that pot, and you can clean off the leaves. You can do all the things that are recommended by the professionals, and you still lose it because once it's weakened. So keeping it healthy is the number one thing.
Did you talk about orchids?
I did not, and I did that on purpose. I believe that we're going to do something on orchids later. Is that correct, Thomas?
Yes, I'm not sure when. Later in the spring, there's going to be a presentation on orchids.
Send any of your questions on orchids to the help desk. We have some master gardeners who grow orchids and are wonderful. I have never successfully had one survive. Keep telling myself I'm going to do this one day, but orchids, they just have their own special needs.
Mm-hmm. And African violets, did you mention?
Yes. In fact, African violets, I think, have a reputation for being more finicky than they are. I think the biggest thing with African violets is to keep them out of that bright light. And I think I mentioned in the presentation that the thing about African violets is you can put them in sunny windows, but protect them from the sun. And the other thing about windows today in houses is most of them have that, they're two-paned and they have some kind of gas, argon or whatever between them, which filters out a lot of the bright light. So being very careful, you can move plants closer to those windows, even if it says, oh, don't put them in a sunny south-facing window. Do it carefully. But because so much of the light rays are filtered out in our modern windows, they may need to be closer to the light than you think. But again, be careful. And then whatever you do with an African violet is don't let it sit in water, because it has they're very small roots. It's not very deep. And if that potting mix stays wet, those roots will rot and it'll keel over.
Jan, we have a question. When you were referring to toxic or non-toxic, are you referring just to pets?
No, I really referred to pets, but pets, children, people, if it's toxic, if it has some toxicity, and again, I'm not saying how toxic or what parts of the plant, read up on individual plants. That got too difficult for me to even try to say, oh, the leaves, but not the stem. The best thing about houseplants is keep them out of reach of any person or thing or animal that is likely to chew on it. They're not intended for that. And most of them don't produce fruits. Sometimes it's just the flower that's toxic. Sometimes it's the leaves, but keep your houseplants. My daughter has rabbits. Rabbits chew on anything, and she will tell you differently, but they are
right.
intelligent.
Yeah, I told the girl yesterday that I changed to Etna, and I just got, yep.
So if you have plants and you have rabbits, I didn't even think.
Oh, no problem. I told her I would put the.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I think that's everything. Looks like everything.
Yeah, great job, Jan. I really learned a lot from that.
I will say this, whenever I prepare these presentations, I learn a lot. And I've been a master gardener since 2012, but I've been growing houseplants since the 60s. And there were still things as I went through and I went, didn't know that. So
back in the 60s, that's when we had spider plants and macrame hanging.
yes. All right. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Anna, terrific presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for presenting, and thank you all for coming. We'll see you all in 2 weeks when we'll be discussing pruning. Hope to see you then.
Bye.